Welcome to URL Unzip, Reboot, and Leave, a podcast about the psychology that moves us. Through real conversations with thinkers, doers, and seekers, we explore how we adapt, evolve, and find meaning. So let's unzip, reboot, and leave. Welcome to another exciting episode of URL. Today, our guest is a course chair and architecture design and senior lecturer at Victoria University. He did masters in architecture from University of Hong Kong and did his PhD from Melbourne Uni. Please welcome Dr. Hing-Wah Chau. How are you, Hing?
Yes, thank you very much for inviting me to join this podcast. It's my pleasure to share my.
Thank you. Today, we will talk about psychology of architectural imagination, how the structure kind of affect our well-being, our internal self, and all this. First question is, as an architect, what you guys mostly focus on, and when you guys got engaged in a project?
Wow, this is a very broad question because as an architect, we really look at the design task holistically. So a lot of design parameters we need to take into consideration because architects different from sculptors. Sculptors may just like a aesthetic piece of art, but architecture is a place for people to use, to live, to spend the time. So that's why it's so complicated and very complex. So first of all, as a designer or as an architect, we need to understand the needs of the client. So to fulfill their requirement first, and also their vision. So some clients may have that particular design visions they really want to achieve. And as an architect, we also need to understand the user-centric design. So understand human experience in terms of the thermal comfort, in terms of the functionality, the emotional impact of the users. Nowadays, we also need to consider the inclusive design. So because different people have different capabilities, spanning from the young kids, children, baby to old adults. So that means our design should be inclusive rather than exclusive. As an architect, architecture is also a piece of art on one hand. So we also need to consider the form, the building form, the proportion, the use of materials, the building style, and sense of identity. That is the aesthetic part. But the pragmatical part is how the building, how the architecture can respond to the site, the context. The context can be the physical context of the site's conditions, also the cultural perspective, like if we design for different people from different countries, then the cultural perspective will comes in. And nowadays, sustainability is also very important because of the climate change, global warming. So how our design can minimize the carbon emission and can fulfill the sustainability development goals of the United Nations, and also the life cost analysis. That means not only the design part, but also the operational phase. Now, is it expensive to operate the building? And as an architect, we also need to collaborate with different stakeholders, different professionals like structural engineers, civil engineers, urban designers, landscape architects, quantitative surveyors. So it's really a teamwork. So collaboration and interdisciplinary participation is also very important. As a kind, also very important is the budget. So, but of course, for students involved in the studying at architecture at university, so that part may be not very substantial, but in real world, budget control is also very important. So that's why we need to take all these factors into consideration when
Right.
doing the design.
So that means like when the client is kind of in a mood to start thinking about something, maybe a building, maybe a temple, maybe a mosque or whatever it might be, since then architecture come into place, right?
Yes.
Like civil engineer and other interdisciplinary engineers maybe come in picture later on, but you guys come from the first day.
Yes, depending on the nature of the project, like if it is a bridge, it's a tunnel, of course, civil engineering will come in a little bit earlier. But if this is really a house or a center, is a building, then the first step normally is to invite architects to provide what we call feasibility studies to understand how feasible it is. So before inviting other participants, like other stakeholders, like because once the design is available, then of course we can consult like civil engineer, a structural engineer. Yeah, it really depends because nowadays we prefer a multidisciplinary approach, so other disciplines can come in earlier. Yeah, traditional way, like normally it's like the kind of approach the architect and architect prepare the drawings. So once the design finished, then pass to to other stakeholders like structural engineers to calculate the structure or quantity survey to prepare the cost. But there's another approach, what we call is early involvement of other participants. So yeah, that is another approach to make it more to shorten the design stage and to make it more to consider other factors as well, like what we call a co-design approach. Nowadays, it's very common to, for example, design a community center. So instead of asking the architect to design a community center, which is just from the architect perspective, but because the community center is designed for the general public, so why not to adopt a co-design approach? Co-design that means involving the general public to participate. They provide the feedback, what they really want to expect the community center, what the design requirements they are expecting. So that involve them earlier, like to organize some co-design workshop. Of course, architect can join as well to listen to the voice of the general public before finalize the design.
How the architectural education and focus changing over the years, and how that will change in this AI world.
Okay, yes, also a very good question. As the course chair in architectural design at Victoria University, we always keep thinking about how to transform the architectural education to cope with the contemporary needs. Yeah, if we trace back the history, architecture education, we can trace back to the bourgeois education in Europe, the apprenticeship. So the students who study architecture, they follow a master and then it's a very rigorous approach. At that time, it was really concerned about like how to draw properly, like technical drawings, because no computer at that time. So the drawing skills was really important. And the classical approach in the past, like emphasizing on symmetrical approach. If the European traditions concerning about the familiar with different columns, the style of the columns, like Ionic columns, Doric columns, Corinthian columns. There's like a pattern or a rules for design, like the arrangement of the spatial arrangement, the column grid, and it's very logical and very and also very emphasized on the proportion and composition of the facade, the front elevation. Like when if for example, because we are living in Melbourne, so if I quote some examples, like the State Library of Victoria, they're facing Melbourne Central. This is a very classic approach with Greek columns in front, and then or Parliament building in Melbourne as well. Those are classical buildings. But another very important milestone will be the Bauhaus. So in 1930s, the Bauhaus is a very important design movement that really incorporate the because of the mass production, the machine. So they really try to break through and then different from the traditional classical bourgeois education in Europe. So more emphasis on the industrial design, and embrace what we call modern movement, modernization, modern movement. So very famous architect is like Le Corbusier's Five Point of Architecture. Walter Gropius is a pioneer or promote. Is a very influential architectural educator in architecture education of the Bauhaus School of Design. Pioneers like Miss Vanderrohe or Fenner Wright. Those are very influential. They emphasize on form follows function. It's a very logical approach. But of course, later on, we have other reaction or criticism. Like if we talk about form follows function, if we just put emphasis on function, how about the local identity? So that's why critical regionalism approach, like because we are from India, from Hong Kong, from China, so the cultural sensitivity is also very important. So instead of just a universal design, modern architecture can put everywhere, we also need to consider the context, the historical perspective, cultural perspectives as well. So nowadays, architectural education is very important. I think one very important pillar is sustainability. I think we can't escape this keyword. So living in the global warming stage era and then climate change. So how to arouse the students' awareness of sustainability. Sustainability is not only environmental sustainability, but also social sustainability and economic sustainability. That means to minimize our impact, adverse impact to the long term to our next generation. So how to minimize our carbon footprint in terms of the use of material, how to minimize the energy consumption. Is it possible to use locally available materials? And we also not only consider like the energy used during the construction process, but the embodied energy as well. Like for example, if we use the marble from Italy, so the production cost and also the transportation cost from Italy to Australia. So those we take into consideration. And also, as I mentioned before, the life cycle analysis. That means the long-term operation. Once you build a building, yeah, it's very nice, it's very beautiful, but if it is very costly to operate in the long term, yeah, the real user will suffer. So that means we will take a very holistic approach to consider all this stuff. And living in Australia, another very important pillar is the Aboriginal context, the First Nations knowledge. Now, that is also very important to take into consideration.
For a normal person, okay, when we see a building, let's say, we understand, okay, there are a lot of lights are coming or easy access to, maybe disabled, or for a normal person also, there is enough space in the car park or whatever. But from a structural or design point of view, we don't understand the sustainability part that much. Is it like, apart from material, what else are kind of more into that sustainability thing?
Well, sustainability is quite is embedded to our everyday life. Like because we live in our dwelling in our house, so it's very closely related to what we are. Like for example, as you mentioned about the lighting, like if we provide a house with a very good orientation, like for example in Melbourne, the good orientation is facing north. So the loft, that means the sunlight can enter in the interior. So especially during the winter time, it provides us very warm, and then that will reduce our need to turn on the heater. So that will also reduce our cost because energy bills is quite expensive now. So that means maximize our daylighting. But of course, we also need to consider in the hot summer, like because in Melbourne, the summer can reach to 40 degrees, 41 degrees. So if we just maximize our openings to face like west side is the afternoon sun is very strong, and then that will also introduce what we call glare. For example, we are using the laptop. So we don't like the glare. So that means on one hand, we welcome the sunlight to enter, especially during the winter time. But on the other hand, we need to mitigate, to control, to regulate. Not all sunlight to be welcome. If the sunlight is strong from coming from the west side, afternoon sunlight, very hot in summer, then we don't like. So that's why those also relate to what we call thermal comfort. And if we talk about glare, that is a visual comfort. So that is also relate to our human perception of the space. And at the same time, it links to energy usage and the long-term operational cost. So sustainability term is like umbrella term. It covers everything. It's very high levels, but it can be down to earth, very basic, because it's closely related to what we are living every day.
Can you just explain it to the brick mortar level? I mean, that sustainability thing, because brick is brick at the end of the day, mortar, maybe it's changing a little bit, but like how we understand that sustainability part from that, like a structural thing.
Yeah. You mentioned about break. So those related to material. So okay, let me consider the material from the sustainable perspective. Like we understand, like for example, steel, it use a lot of energy to produce, like aluminum, those energy. So is it possible to explore an alternative way for minimizing the usage of energy during the production process? So that's why some designer they explore like timber, so or even some sustainable material called hemp. So those are naturally sustainable based materials, and they reduce the energy consumption. And for some, even like for some, ham is a very interesting term because there will be a global ham summit in Melbourne in coming December. So talk about the use of ham for building materials. So ham is a plant that grows very quickly, like within 3 or 4 months, can be harvested. So compared to traditional timber, wood, it may take many years. And if we cut those timbers, there's a concern about the impact to the forest. And like so, but if it's like from some plants that grow quickly, like bamboo or hemp, few months and can harvest, then and during the process of growing, the hemp material also absorb the carbon. So that will, from talking about the carbon emission perspective, it is very beneficial to the environment. And it can also absorb some heavy metals from the soil, so it's also involved in the soil decontamination part. And the material itself, hemp, can be used in fiber, in building materials, hemp quick or hemp board. Yeah. So that's why these are an alternative way we consider the building materials. How to use some renewable materials. On one hand, reduce the energy consumption and also increase the ecological footprint.
Can we integrate philosophical inquiry or ethical reasoning? You touched upon a little bit about the ancient context, but those ancient discipline into a design.
Yes, thank you very much for asking this question. Because before I studied PhD at Melbourne Uni, actually I studied Master of Arts in Philosophy at the Chinese University of Hong Kong for 2 years at part
Right.
time. The Chinese University of Hong Kong is a very famous place for studying what we call phenomenology. Like some famous European philosophers like Heidegger or Merleau-Ponty. So they are very influential, and a lot of scholars they try to compare between or evaluate the impact of the continental European philosophy to the architectural thinking. When we talk about phenomenology, we talk about the philosophical inquiry about the human being, the relationship between human beings and the environment, living environment, natural environment, and built environment. So emphasizing on our sensory experience, how we perceive the space, the spatial quality. So that links back to light, nature, ethical relationship. So how Heidegger's term is called being in the world. So we have, as a being in the world, we have our obligations to protect our environment. So that also brings the sustainability thinking into the philosophical discussion. We are not to maximize or the usage of natural resources. We are just a guardians. We need to protect our country, the natural environment. We need to minimize our impact to the environment. At the same time, we provide a what we call a poetic environment for people to enjoy that arouse the sensory perceptions in terms of light, in terms of sound, in terms of smell. It seems very philosophical, but that's a very close relationship between philosophical thinking and architectural design.
Yeah, it should be, because I guess all these things are necessary for a human life to flourish and explore. Can this architectural design integrate like a social diversity in this urban setting?
Yes, definitely. Cultural and social diversity, especially like for example, Melbourne is a multicultural city. We can see a lot of different people from different countries come here. So we have a lot of cultural sensitive areas. Like because I'm from China, so Chinatown in Melbourne CBD or Greek precinct or Lygon Street is an Italian precinct. So we have a lot of these type of urban spaces with a very strong cultural cultural identity. So that's why how for the built environment to reflect the cultural identity and heritage. So heritage is another term, use of heritage sites. Yes.
Because in urban setting, what
Yeah.
you said, like the Italian or the Box Hill, I'm close to Box Hills, or the
Yes.
Chinese,
Yes.
but it's predominantly restaurants. and and lot of that society people. I mean, if you go to Truganina or Point Cook, there will be a lot of Indians, a lot of Indian restaurants. Apart from that, we don't see any other social diversity as such. I mean, from a layman's lens, how you see that in that urban setting?
It's always like a challenge, like as a designer, how to embed those identity into it. Some may be more obvious, like when you talk about Chinatown, we have a Chinese museum in Chinatown, and we have those Chinese gateway to define the entrance of the Chinatown. That is quite
Okay.
significant. Or if we're talking about follows the traditional way of designing um, the cultural symbols. I think different ethnic groups they may have their own particular way. Like for example, if we design a mosque, so those will follow the Muslim or Islamic traditions. Yeah, yeah, I agree with you. Like for urban spaces, for the general public, some except like those Chinese gateway for in the Chinatown or museum, those like cultural iconics. Yeah, not very clear. Sometimes maybe the Chinatown will hanging some Chinese lanterns. For Greek, maybe some Greek symbols or characters. Another challenge is because our Aboriginal culture in Melbourne nowadays, every time we present, we need to acknowledge the ancestors, the traditional indigenous culture, and the First Nations knowledge. So this is also a key areas how our design can embed those Aboriginal context as well. So working at Victoria University, we have a research center on indigenous culture, First Nations knowledge. So we for that particular center, we have a very we highlight those First Nations symbols, and we also create a garden using the Australian indigenous plants and try to link back to our indigenous traditions and past. So yeah, it's a big topic. So like, how did you incorporate some cultural elements into the design, built environment, and arouse people's the awareness of their identity? It is also important. Apart from the physical parameters, some cultural activities and event also very important. Like for example, the Chinatown every year they celebrate the Chinese New Year. I think those soft programs are also very important. If just the hardware, I think it's not enough. How the people they use or they celebrate like fireworks, line dance, those are also important. I think it's a duty for us to pass from generation to generation. We educate our next generation how to appreciate and respect other traditions are also very important.
Can architecture enhance empathy?
Empathy.
Yeah.
Okay. Empathy seems a very ambiguous terms, but when we down to earth back to the built environment or architectural design, for some would say when we talk about urban space, can the urban public space to be more inviting, like we talk about Federation Square in Melbourne. So a lot of events happening there and allow different diverse groups to use the space. So how to access to the space compared to like some cities, what we call gated communities. So they demarcate all these areas. We are gated. Unless you have the permission, you can't enter. But I think in Melbourne, the urban space, they are always open and you're welcome to join. Yeah. I also visit some cities, even the public parks. You need to pay the entry fee before you can enter because that is the management cost involved, and then that really excludes some people who cannot afford to pay the entrance fee. They cannot enjoy the public space. But I think in Melbourne, it's very good. Public space are welcome for people to use. Also, this is a space for people to enjoy, and then what we call inclusive design at the same time universal design. Talking about building design, so because I'm currently teaching an architectural design studio, asking the students to design office space. So even office space, we can see the transformation. In the past, like people work in cubicles in different rooms. So for example, if you are a boss or you're a manager, you are entitled to a room and then facing the windows. But if you are lower rank in the office, you maybe put your legs to the photocopier or near the pantry, not the desirable space. But I think the people's thinking is now changed. Like we embedded what we call equity into the design, the open plans. So everyone entitled to the same size of the table, everyone equal, no matter you are a manager or you are a staff. So that's to try to break down the hierarchy. And then open plan could also encourage people for social interaction, social engagement, or the spontaneous interaction. Those are quite important. And I also visited an office in Hong Kong because after the COVID, so actually the demand for office space is reduced because of the work from home. So the work from home is also an approach that allows embedded inclusive design because some family members may need to look after the babies, but they really need the flexibility. So they have some other commitments. So work from home can allow them to, like for example, maybe 5 days, or maybe 2 days at work from home, maybe 3 days work from office. So then the demand for the office space, physical space will be reduced. So instead of having a physical desk for each staff, so the office that I visit in Hong Kong is a hot desk approach. The whole office is a hot desk and now paperless because everything in the cloud. So they just every staff just has a company laptop, so they can plug into the power socket. They can access the Wi-Fi. They can book in advance in a booking online booking system or portal. So for example, today I booked this location, but there are different type of seating arrangement. Like some may be high table, some may be a lower desk, some may be couches, some may be cafe settings. So the office environment with different arrangements, different settings, they really suit different people's needs. That is also a way to break the hierarchy and what we call empathy to understand the lead, the real lead of the workers and the design can cope with.
One question I have on this office space, because typically in Melbourne or in any big city, office buildings are what? Like a square, like a rectangular shape, you know, glass. That's it. Maybe the gate is a little bit of design and all. Yes, they are doing a lot of these open spaces, a lot of greenery within the office and all. Is there any new office building design is coming in future? And secondly, this open approach desk wise, where everyone can see everyone's screen and all, is that really working well?
You talk about the greenery. So that is another term called biophilic design. So how to incorporate the greenery elements into the office space. So people always complain like if we work in the office space in the past, like surrounded by walls and then without daylighting, it's not very welcoming. Actually, even now, for example, I visit some of the offices. For example, a GP, general practice, medical practitioners. When I enter in the GP's office, it's just surrounded by wall without any window. So daylighting is not. We cannot take it for granted. Yeah, we need a design approach to emphasize that. So yeah, and the biophilic design is another element to incorporate the design into the office environment. Because I'm from Hong Kong, so one very pioneer building, although it was built in 1980s, which is the Hong Kong Bank headquarters, but it's still very pioneer. For example, the whole structure instead of top-down approach, so what to build from bottom up is prefabricated from the off-site and then transport. It's like a different components, like a Lego, and then stack on top of each other, and then assembly on site. And instead of column beam structure, it's like a hanger hanging the four slab from the top. And instead of having the lift to stop every floor, so the lift stop every 3 floors. Encourage the staff to walk. So after get off from the lift, you either take the escalator to go up one level or going down one level. So they really encourage the staff to collaborate or social interaction, and they have sky gardens at different levels. So to allow staff like during the lunchtime, they can gather and enjoy the fresh air and then close to nature. So those are ideas. So how to break the traditional like floor by floor divisions. Like for example, like some large corporation will own several levels of an office building. So how to break down the horizontal segregations, like to create a atrium, vertical connection with steps and staircase, and even to create an amphitheater. For example, sometimes the office can invite some guest speakers or industry partners to deliver a guest talk. So the amphitheater within the office space will be an area for social interaction and to share the knowledge, provide the insight. If the office space is near to the top of the building, so you can introduce the skylights to allow the sunlight to enter into the office space, or even access to the podium or the roof with a green roof. So green roof is another measures really promoted by the city of Melbourne that it's like a mitigation measures for urban heat island effect. So instead of a hard roof surface, concrete surface, that if we provide a green roof, that the plants will absorb the heat and will lower the urban heat island effect or mitigate the urban heat island effect. And it will be a very good location for staff to enjoy their lunch or social gathering. That relates to health and well-being. Yeah.
Mm, mm. So now, because more urbanization happening, more and more people are living in big cities. That means more in apartments and all. How the living spaces changes happening,
Living space is changing. It really depends on if a developer perspective or
or how
but
much money you have.
yes, if you can afford, like for example, I'm now in Grand Railway. The Grand Railway is very expensive. Like even the apartment maybe 1 million or over 1 million. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So affordability is another dimension. So on one hand, like I think that really leads the government to step in, so to formulate some policy to encourage the what we call affordable housing, to provide affordable housing. I think if you look at the news, housing crisis, people keep questioning because a lot of people they migrate to Melbourne, and then as they grow as a city that with growing population, how to cope with the housing needs because it takes time to build the housing, but it's not enough, and then there's a long waiting list for people to rent an apartment unit. I think in some extreme case, maybe one apartment unit, 100 people waiting on it. So, how to shorten the waiting list of the social housing so that really leads the government to step in. If there's like for land to develop, if it's a big piece of land for a developer to develop an apartment design, is it possible to regulate some proportion, like can we set 10%, 20% affordable housing and the 80% for private sale? So that can yeah address the needs of the housing demand. I'm also from Hong Kong because I'm from Hong Kong, so that's another approach. What we call is like a win-win situation. The government like encourage the developers to develop a piece of land, but on the other hand, it's hard unless you provide some incentive. Otherwise, it's hard for developer to take one additional step. So the policy is what we call a pop ratio bonus. For example, if the developer segregate the ground floor or the first floor, like to provide the bridges to connect to other buildings or to segregate the ground floor for social or urban spaces contribution, allow the general public to enjoy the public space, even though it's a private land, then they can enjoy an extra bonus or pop ratio on top, allow them to build a little bit higher. Yeah, so but the general public can enjoy the piece of land, public space. Yeah, so or the podium level, the general public can enter the public podium landscape gardens. So it's like amenity, landscape amenity provisions in the community. But at the same time, the developer can earn extra pop ratio and bonus of the piece of land.
Nice, because if it is like building after building, then there is like
Yeah.
less and less public space also.
Yes.
Nice. Wow.
So it's a
Okay.
win-win situation.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Exactly. Okay. Now, the because more and more, apart from designing, we are going into the future smart cities mode, and that means a lot of technology, a lot of surveillance, a lot of design are intersecting with each other. Is there any ethical dilemma as a designer or as an architect you are feeling or you are overseeing, you are seeing future?
You mark up, you talk about the smart home design. So this is a dimension that I haven't mentioned so far. How to integrate the smart home technology? Yeah, yeah, understand. Like we totally foresee that for the technology advancement. So how that the technology itself can be incorporated into the building design, architectural design. Some countries they are more advanced, like in Japan or Europe, integrate the smart home technology into the building or architectural design. For example, say we have the sensors to monitor the energy consumption, and there's a display board to show the live data about how much energy you use and then how much water you use. So that really can arouse people's awareness of the yeah, is there any way to minimize that energy consumption? So, like for example, I think that really relates to the habit. After we leave a room, how about to switch off the light or yeah, turn off the tap if we don't want to use that water. So those are the mentality issue. But if we have a live display of those data, or and nowadays if we live in a house, if we install the solar panels, if we can show those data, like how much energy can be generated by the solar panels, and how much energy can be stored in the battery. So those are some technologies that we can incorporate into the design. And smart home technology can also involve, like for example, the control of the thermal comfort. Like we have the thermostat to regulate the indoor temperature at, for example, 25 degrees or 24 degrees. So if we above that, then it would trigger the ventilation or air conditioning. But if you lower that, then we just reduce it. So that because some people they get used to air conditioning, they just turn on the air conditioning, no matter how's the circumstances. So those devices will help to regulate the usage. And for older adults, safety is also a concern. A lot of situation is accidental fall, for example, in the toilet space. For retirement villages, it is a real concern if they live by themselves. So how to incorporate the sensors or some emergency call buttons in the design. So in case of they ask for help, they can press the buttons, or there's some sensors and detect the situation and avoid any accidents to happen. Yeah, those are also consideration as well.
So we are almost in the end of our podcast. The last question to you: if we imagine cities designed by philosophers rather than engineers, how different would they look?
Yeah, it's very interesting. You compare philosophers and engineers. I think philosophers they are very good at like critical thinking, reflective thinking, and the philosophical concepts. Depending on which school of thought, like if we talk about phenomenology, sensory perception of the space. So those are very poetic and high sounding. I think philosophical thinking is important because they provide a conceptual framework underpinning our design approach. Engineers theoretically more practical. They talk about the structural stability, the functioning of those systems. For example, if you talk about mechanical systems, mechanical engineering, the HVACs like heating, ventilation, and air conditioning systems, lift installation system, plumbing and drainage system, those related to building services engineering, or acoustics. So how to create acoustic engineering, how to create to reduce the echoes or more comfortable from the acoustic perspective, or lighting engineering, talking about the lighting levels, or fire engineering, talking about the fire safety. So those are important, very pragmatical. I think nowadays when we design like architecture design or building design or built environment, we really need is a multidisciplinary approach. We need to collaborate with different team players like engineers, quantity surveyors, landscape architects, urban design, urban planners, architects. I think different stakeholders they have their different roles to play. It's very important is for our students to understand how to communicate and express themselves clearly and then willing to exchange the ideas. So to have the what we call synergy among our different players, and then contribute to bring the best outcomes through the design approach. I think that's the most important thing.
Excellent. So you use the word synergy, which is very, very important. And so on that, we should end our podcast here. Thank you, Hing-Wah. Thank you for
Thank
your
you very
time.
much.